All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants who are joining from around the world. On behalf of the board of directors, the section chair, and the section officers, I would like to welcome you to today's technical lecture titled Leveraging Oil and Gas for a Just Transition Towards a Net Zero Future. Now, before we start the meeting, a few ground rules so that we can have an orderly meeting. So please, when you join in, mute your mics during the presentation. We'll also allow the presentation to finish before we pose our questions. And during the question time, we will take them one at a time. Hopefully, we'll have enough time to take all your questions. And if you have audio issues, you can also type it into the chat. I'll read them out, and then they'll be addressed by the presenter. I would like to call on the section chair, Madam Sheena Usu-Ansah, to give us a welcome address before we move on to the theme and then the speaker. Sheena.
Thank you, Joseph. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Good morning to everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you once again. I believe Joseph has welcomed all of you. And thank you, Dr. Yen, for accepting our invitation to give us such a lecture. Today's topic, I know, is of particular interest for a lot of us workers in the oil and gas industry. With the recent talks and a lot more pressure that the industry has been going through with the whole talk about energy transition and the net zero, it's put a lot of people in a lot of uncertainties. We know that a lot of the companies have started putting measures in place on how to achieve their own net zero. But a lot of, out of all these plans in place, not so much is being heard about how we, particularly in Ghana, are going to transition together with the rest of the world. Or we have heard some, but it's still not so much clear for a lot of people. So I believe today's lecture would probably give us a lot of insight on how in our part of the world can also prepare adequately for a just transition, and how we can also use our current know-how and apply it in the new transition that is coming up, so we don't get squashed out of the system. So I hope we can all learn something today, and how to not phase out with this energy transitions. Thank you so much. Over to you, Joseph.
All right, thank you, Sheena. Thank you so much for those opening remarks. Thank you. So dive straight in. So I will introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Yen Adams Sokama Nuyam. I hope I got that right as well. Is a senior lecturer in the Department of Petroleum Engineering at KNUST. So he teaches, conducts research, and supervises students' research in relevant reservoir engineering areas, such as net zero greenhouse gas emission solutions, carbon capture, utilization and storage, geological hydrogen storage, well deliverability, green enhanced oil recovery, and synthesis of sustainable oil field materials. So that's quite a large repertoire of skills that he dabbles in. Prior to his current position, he worked as an assistant professor in natural gas engineering from 2016 to 2017, and as a research fellow in petroleum engineering from 2013 to 2016 at the University of Stavanger in Norway, where he also taught graduate and undergraduate courses in reservoir engineering and supervised several graduate and undergraduate level theses. He has worked on projects with international E&P companies such as Equinor, PGNiG Upstream Norway, AS, and reputable research institutes such as NORS, which is a Norwegian research center. His research work has been widely published in reputable peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Adams holds a PhD in petroleum engineering and an MSc as well in petroleum engineering, both from the University of Stavanger, Norway, as well as a BSc in petroleum engineering from KNUST, Ghana. Wow, so we have a very experienced and knowledgeable presenter to take us through the theme for today. So without wasting my time, Dr. Yen, I will allow you to dive right into the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone who is joining us today. And thank you, Joseph, for the introduction. I'm also grateful to Sheena for the introductory remarks. I'll dive right into the presentation then. Now, the topic before us today is leveraging oil and gas for a just transition towards a net zero future. And I think I've been introduced sufficiently. So I'll just move on to the presentation outline. So this is going to be the outline of my presentation this morning. I'll start with an introduction, and then we will look at an overview of the importance of fossil fuels, the real cost of replacing fossil fuels. And then I'll move on to an overview of the environmental footprint of fossil fuels. We will examine Africa's battle for a just transition. This has become a major issue nowadays. And then we will proceed to leveraging oil and gas for a just transition, where I'm going to show a framework that we can actually follow to use oil and gas to help us move the energy transition faster than it would have rather gone. Then that will lead to a conclusion. The presentation is not going to be very long, but because most of the things are technical, I'm going to be very slow at explaining certain terminologies and ideas so that everyone can understand it. Because I understand that the viewership is going to be very wide. There may be many people who do not have a technical background. So I'm going to be a bit slow in that. Yeah, so this is me. I'm the head of Department for Petroleum Engineering. I'm also the principal research lead at the Net Zero Carbon Emission Lab. That's something that Joseph didn't talk much about. Yeah, the rest, I think he pretty much covered everything. And currently we have some ongoing projects at the Net Zero Carbon Emission Lab, which are also listed here. All right. Now, if you take out oxygen, okay, if you take out oxygen, fossil fuels is probably one of the natural resources that have been of immense benefit to humanity after oxygen. And it is only because oxygen is something that we breathe every day. We need it for our survival. But if you take out oxygen, there's no single natural resource out there that plays a crucial role in the life of humanity than fossil fuels. But recently we have a challenge. Okay, the world is divided by fossil fuels. There are some up north, which we call the global north. They believe that we should find a way to stop producing fossil fuels as soon as we can because of its environmental footprint. And then we down here, we are just starting industrialization. We are starting to think about how to develop our country. And we need affordable energy. And we see fossil fuel as the cornerstone of our development. Okay, so they are on one side and we are on another side. But we need the global north. We need to admit that. And the global north need that. So we can't stand at opposite sides. We need to find a way to work together. But how do we find a common ground to work together? We want fossil fuel to stay. They want fossil fuel out. I believe that the most plausible way to stay together is if we can leverage fossil fuels to facilitate the energy transition. If fossil fuel is playing a role to facilitate the transition, then there's a common ground because we get to keep our fossil fuel to help us in our development, and they also get to speed up the energy transition, which they are very much concerned about. without anyone losing out. Okay, so this morning my task is to show you how we can do this, and I hope I will succeed in that. Now, first, let's look at an overview of the importance of fossil fuel. If you look at the figure here, okay, right from 1850 to 2022, the demand for fossil fuel has always gone up. Okay, the share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix in 1985 was 88.6. In the year 2000, it was 86.7. In 2022, it was 82.0. By the end of 2023, it's going to be about 83. Okay, the IEA projects that by 2030, the share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix is going to be just slightly less than 75%. And by 2050, it's going to be slightly less than 60%. So fossil fuels have contributed about 80% or more of global energy for the past maybe 4 to 5 decades. This is just how important it has been to us in terms of energy generation. And energy goes into almost every aspect of our life. Okay. Now, in terms of transportation, look at the figure here from the IEA. Our transportation, global transportation, depends on oil products for about 91%. And this goes as far back as 1970. Okay? If you look at the data from there upwards, all our transportation every year has been predominantly dependent on oil and gas products. Now, from 1970, it has only reduced by about 3.5 percentage points. Let's look at industrialization, which is another aspect of our life because we need to produce products, we need to build cities, we need to develop. Okay, if you look at the global figures, industrialization depends mostly on fossil fuel, probably more than the 74% that I'm showing here. Now, people out there see fossil fuels as just CO2 or carbon. But all the products here, the products on the left here, okay, in this table, are the products that require combustion of fossil fuel. They are the products that when we produce, we emit greenhouse gases. The products on the right-hand side are all integral parts of our daily life. In fact, wherever you are sitting this morning, if you look around you without even standing up, there's a high chance that you will find close to about maybe 40 to 50% of the materials around you to be fossil fuel products, direct or indirect fossil fuel products. So that is how our life depends on fossil fuel. Okay? So about 13% of total petroleum products are used as feedstock to produce non-combustible products. These products, when produced, do not emit any greenhouse gases into the environment. So are we going to stop producing, using fossil fuels just because some products depend on combustion, which brings out greenhouse gases, so that we forfeit all these many products that are so useful to our daily life? Now, if we want to replace fossil fuels, this is the real cost, because people are advocating all manner. Recently, I even read from someone who said that probably we should reduce, if we can't phase out, we should just reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. Yeah, that is a good idea, but it's also not possible because of the reasons that I've shown you already. But if we want to replace fossil fuels, really, we will have to increase wind energy by about 15 times, solar energy by 25 times, power grid by 3 times, green hydrogen by 500 times, electric vehicles and batteries by 60 times. Carbon capture and utilization would have to be scaled about 100 times. Now, the challenge is that these technologies all exist today, but they are not at the stage where we can scale them to these figures that I'm showing here. Okay, so even if we want to achieve this, we need time, let's say by 2030, 2050, before the technology will develop fully to the extent where we can scale to this magnitude that I've shown here. Now, to be able to scale them up to that level, we need to mine rare earth metal or these minerals. We need a lot of them not just small amounts. Now, for graphite anodes, we need to increase production for about 45%, cobalt about 40%, lithium about 30%, neodymium about 30%, nickel about 15%, and copper about 10%. Now, the challenge is that, first of all, we need to find these minerals. That is number one. Number two, we need to be able to mine them sustainably, because mining is also a carbon-intensive industry. Okay? So we need to mine them sustainably. Currently, we don't have the technology to do that. So which means that the technology there is also under development, the same way that the technology for producing this clean energy are also under development. That is the real challenge we are facing. What about the financial cost? Okay, if we want to achieve this, let's say by 2050, the world will need to invest a minimum of about $3.5 trillion annually from today to 2050. In total, that will cost us not less than 110 trillion. Now, remember that cost of living increases with time. So if you forecast this out there, actually it's going to be probably far more than this figure in the near future. Now, whilst I've showed all the importance of an overview of the importance of fossil fuels and also the cost, the real cost that we need to bear if we want to replace them, we need to also look at the carbon footprint of fossil fuels. That is the major concern today. Now, the reason why people want to phase out fossil fuels is not because they don't like the products that are coming out of there, but they are afraid that we may risk humanity because of fossil fuels. Now, I will start this part is becoming a bit technical. So I will start by explaining what we call the remaining carbon budget. Now, the remaining carbon budget is basically the net amount of carbon dioxide that as humans we can emit while keeping global warming below, let's say, 1.5 degrees C. The Paris Agreement made broad countries to agree that by 2050, we want global average temperature to be about 1.5 degrees C or below that compared to pre-industrial figures. Now, greenhouse gas emissions have a strong connection with global average temperature. It means that if we emit more CO2, more methane, more nitrous oxide into the environment, the more we emit, the higher the global average temperature is going to increase. Okay, so there's that correlation. Now, the question is, how much of these greenhouse gases would we emit into the environment that will take the global average temperature to about 1.5 degrees C, more than the pre-industrial figures? Now, that is what we call the remaining carbon budget. So basically, the amount of greenhouse gases that we have at our disposal or luxury to emit before we reach our limit of that 1.5 degrees C, because it has been predicted that beyond 1.5 degrees C, we may risk human life and global security to the increasing temperature. Okay. Now, one thing that all of us need to understand is that the literature shows that currently there's no scientifically accurate model for estimating the remaining carbon budget. So it means that we do not know for sure the amount of greenhouse gases left to be emitted into the environment that will take us to this 1.5 degrees C of global average temperature compared to the pre-industrial level. We don't know that for sure. Now, the figure here shows predictions from about 12 different authors. So you can see them here. All these predictions vary, okay? And the range from about minus 192 to about 779. You can see the gap, okay? And the level of uncertainty in the prediction. And these have been predicted from 3 different models, okay? So it is quite difficult for us to quantify the amount of greenhouse gases left for us to put into the environment to take us to the point where the life of humans and global security will be at risk. The most recent estimate of the remaining carbon budget was done by Lambeau et al. So you can see this paper. I recommend it strongly for those who want to read. That is the near accurate one that we have written. Okay? This is the most recent estimate of the remaining carbon budget, which is consistent with assessments published by about 50 leading climate scientists. Now, this estimate predicts that if humanity wants to have a 50-50 chance, that's why I said we are not too sure. If we want to have a 50% chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees C, we can only emit about 250 billion metric tons of CO2. Okay, I'm going to believe that this data is accurate, but actually it is not. Okay, so I'm going to use this in the rest of my analysis. For those who are just coming in, this is very important for the rest of the lecture. Okay, we need to understand the remaining carbon budget, and the remaining carbon budget, as I said, is basically the amount of greenhouse gases that we, humanity, have at our disposal to put into the environment before we put our lives into risk. Okay? And the closest estimate that many scientists agree is about 250 billion metric tons of CO2. Now, let's go to oil and gas to see how we compare to these figures.
Sorry, please, if you just joined in, please mute yourself, please.
All right, I will continue. Now, according to the IEA, that is the International Energy Agency, in 2022, the production, transport, and processing of oil and gas emitted the equivalent of 5.1 billion tons of CO2 in 2022. All right. Okay, please. I will continue. According to the IEA, the production, transport, and processing of oil and gas, which we call Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in 2022, was 5.1 billion tons of CO2. Okay, that means the production of oil and gas, processing, activities of the industry, which include venting, flaring, and fugitive emissions, all together globally contributed about 5.1 billion tons of CO2 in 2022. Let's just take that figure and assume that the industry is not going to go beyond that in the next coming year. If you take that alone, and you just take 2022, 5.1 billion, 2023, another 5.1 billion, that adds up to 10.2 billion. 2024, that adds up to 15.3 billion. If you continue to add up, it means that the oil and gas industry alone will exhaust these 250 billion tons of CO2 carbon budget that we have by the year 2071, which is just about 49 years. So if we assume that we are taking care of all other emissions from every sector, including agriculture, and we just focus on only the oil and gas industry alone, our Scope 1 and 2 emissions will consume the entire carbon budget that we have left by 2071, which is very alarming. Okay? Now, as an industry, there are two main technologies that we are betting on to offset our emissions. The first one is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So let's see how well we are doing in that. Okay. Now, if you look at the figures here, in the first table here, these are figures from 2022. The total number of facilities, CCUS facilities, were 196, but only 30 were operational. And these 30 were capturing and storing 42.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Okay, let's assume that all these facilities are operational from today. Okay, if they are operational altogether, we will be able to capture only 243.9 million tons of CO2 as an industry, which is just about 4.8% of CO2 emissions from the oil and gas industry alone. So that is just how small our capacity is compared to our emissions for now. Okay, but the hope is that we will be able to grow this a bit higher. So you can see, to make a meaningful impact, we need to increase the number of these operational facilities by almost about 1,000 times. But that is possible because preliminary data shows that the available storage space that we have to store CO2 globally is about 55,581 gigatons, okay, which is just a little bit less than 222 times of the maximum carbon budget. So it means we have capacity to store more than 200 times of the remaining carbon equivalent of the remaining carbon budget. Okay? But currently, we are doing only 4.8% of our emissions through CCUS. So we are not doing enough. Now, what about afforestation and reforestation, which is another area that many companies are investing? Okay, all the plants and trees in the whole world right now sequester just about 2.4 billion tons of CO2 annually, which is just about 47% of the CO2 emissions from the oil and gas industry alone. So it means even if we double all the trees in this whole world, still it will not be enough to offset emissions from oil and gas operations alone, from the industry alone, which is alarming, right? So it means these two technologies currently are not offsetting our emissions. And that's why many people are concerned. Now, I believe that Africa is struggling to sustain fossil fuel production because of these three main reasons. Okay, we need fossil fuel. The world understands that we need it. But we are struggling to justify that we need it because of these three main reasons. Number one, it is not the global north that is stopping us from developing our fossil-related resources, but our own lack of local investment and technology. Okay? We have oil right in our land. I don't think that anyone would come here and stop us if we had capacity to produce this oil by ourselves, refine it, and use it. No one was going to stop us from doing that. Okay, so we could basically invest our own if we have enough. For example, GNPC could go out there, drill, produce, and Tema Oil Refinery could basically refine that, and we could use it as a people to develop and also export the remaining to other countries that are in need. So no one is stopping us from doing that. But the challenge is that we do not have the resources to do this. We don't have the technology and we don't have the investment. So those who are putting in the technology and investment are the same people who do not want fossil fuels now. So that is where the challenge is. Okay. Number two, the whole world is aware of the high carbon footprint of fossil fuels already. Okay, so this is not something we can hide from anyone. It is impossible to justify the production of fossil fuels with the simple reason that we need fuels for development. Okay. The social commentary won't do for this. I think we have tried that for the past many years. It hasn't worked. Okay, where social commentators just try to say, okay, look at us, we are at a point where we need the fuel. Please just bear with us and let's also use it because our people need energy. That is not enough. If we want to succeed, we need to develop a scientific argument to prove that we can continue to develop fossil resources in our land without risking the planet. It is only the science that will work. Okay, if we can show the science that we are doing something that is not risking the environment, they will not be interested in putting investment in there, and no one will be interested in risking themselves to help us to develop these resources. And we need them to invest in our resources as well. If you look at all the companies that are stood here, you don't see any company here that is fully African. Okay? That is one of the biggest challenges that we have. We don't have fully owned African companies that have the investment, the capacity and technology to invest into the development of our resources without much help from our global partners who are now walking away from the development of fossil fuels. Okay? But as I said, if we want to succeed, in going along with them, we need to show that we can do this without scientifically risking the environment. And I'm going to propose something that we can do in that aspect. Now, this is what we have been doing when it comes to a just transition. Basically, we have been saying that we should be allowed to emit the same amount of anthropogenic greenhouse gases as the major contributors before we take equal responsibility to mitigate. So you hear many people on platforms and they say, okay, we, Africa, contribute only just about 3% of global emissions. We have a reason not to even consider mitigation for now because we are not contributing much. And the global partners should bear with us and allow us to continue to go the way we are going until we are contributing much before they come up with this conversation. Well, that is great. It sounds like a very fair idea. But there are 4 reasons why this will not sell. Number 1, we are in a state of emergency already, where the impact of climate change is already here. Okay, we can see coastal areas getting flooded. I mean, you go to the farm, the same animals you used to see are no longer there. Our weather is becoming hotter, people are getting more sick. You can see all these things around us. So we are in a global emergency. This is not the time that we can justify these things for anyone to listen to us. It's the time that they want everyone on board. And if you are not on board, you are seen as an enemy of the planet. Number 2, we are the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Everyone knows that. Okay. Number 3, we don't have a history of being treated just in anything. I am not too old, but I don't remember the last time where there was an aspect of society that we said that, okay, this time Africans have been treated justly, just like everyone have been treated. Okay, so if we have never been treated justly, what makes us think that this time in the transition, we are going to be treated justly? And then finally, we cannot fight for justice until we contribute equitably at the table. Okay, the global table where the negotiations are going on, if you are not contributing, you are the receiving end. And you can't ask for justice at the receiving end. So if we want to really fight for justice and get our conversation through, I think that we will need to justify that by going to the table to make some contribution. And we can do that because we have natural resources that the transition depends on. We have youth. We have probably the most youthful population globally. We have young people who are very good, very learned young people, except that we don't have the capacity to retain them. So most of them are leaving. So we could have the human resources. We have the natural resources that we could make a meaningful contribution at the table. And by making that contribution, we could then fight for that just transition. But currently, we are not doing that. Now, if we want a just transition, we as an oil and gas industry will have to look inside first before we look outside. Okay, so the oil and gas industry must begin the just transition. Now, there's a principle out there that many people here probably know, the polluter pays principle. Okay, I am asking that the oil and gas industry should think about upholding the polluter pays principle, where the party responsible for producing most pollution take responsibility for paying for the damage done to the environment. Each operator must be made to take responsibility commensurate with its carbon intensity. Okay, and the carbon intensity basically is how many grams of carbon dioxide equivalent that you release to produce 1 barrel of oil equivalent. So those who pollute more must pay more, and those who pollute less must pay less. I mean, this should be out there. This should be something that we really encourage and everyone wants to do. And I've seen many companies around us here investing so much into mitigation activities. But I haven't seen us uphold it, where those who are polluting more are made to pay more or offset more, and those who are polluting less are made to offset less. Now, how do we go about doing that? I'm going to show a very simple case study. I hope that I'll be able to do this without going too much into the technique. Now, let's just take a typical barrel of crude oil. So this is the barrel, okay? A typical mass of a barrel of crude oil is roughly between 128 kg and 136 kg. Okay, so if you take the average, it's about 132 kg, right? Globally, the well to refinery entrance carbon intensity, it means that from the well, when oil is being produced, from the reservoir into the well, up to export, down to refinery. If we trace it, we trace a barrel of oil that is produced throughout to refinery, the carbon footprint or the amount of carbon dioxide emitted compared to that volume, okay? And I'm using mass here, okay, so that it will be easier to quantify. It's what I'm looking at here. It's what we call the well to refinery entrance carbon intensity. Globally, it's between 8.84 kilograms CO2 equivalent per barrel and 86.39 kilograms CO2 equivalent per barrel. Okay, so if you take an average, that is about 50.46 kilograms CO2 equivalent per barrel. Now, this literally means that globally, on the average, for every barrel of oil produced and refined, 38% of that consists of direct greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so if this was the barrel, when you sell it, 38% of that is actually coming from your direct emissions. This is the global average. Okay, now the remaining fraction of the barrel, when it is combusted elsewhere, then contributes to what we call your Scope 3 emissions. And usually you are not directly responsible for that. Now remember, these figures are strongly field dependent. If you come to our field here, depending on our environmental consciousness, our carbon footprint could be far less than these 38% per barrel. So if you take this percentage, okay, this will represent the cost of oil. The cost of this fraction of oil will be the minimum revenue that the industry owes to the climate. Because if you are producing a barrel of oil and you emit this amount, let's say 38%, then when you sell it, 38% of that money is not yours. It is the money that you owe to the climate, because that is how much you polluted to get that barrel of oil. Okay, so the cost of this fraction of oil is the minimum revenue that the industry owes to the climate. I don't think we are paying that. So if a barrel of crude oil is, for example, $80, using the approximate global average of 38%, the industry will owe, let's say, the climate at least $30 per barrel, which it should reinvest into reducing its carbon footprint, right? Okay, so to make a strong case to sustain the development and utilization of fossil fuels, the industry must do two things. Number one, it must commit to charging and utilizing this minimum revenue it owes to the climate to reduce its carbon footprint. So it means, as an industry here, a local industry, Ghana oil and gas industry, we could conduct a carbon intensity assessment, and maybe we will find it to be 5% or 10%. And that stakeholders will have to sit down and look at the possible way of reinvesting that part of the revenue into reducing the carbon footprint of our industry. Okay, so that eventually we attain net zero without burdening, giving an extra burden to both the companies and also to the government revenue. So this is going to be like a shared responsibility that is coming from both parties. Number two, then we must commit to spending the remaining revenue after we've taken this revenue that we believe we owe to the environment because of our carbon footprint. We have to commit to spending the remaining revenue on carbon negative projects that will further reduce Scope 3 emissions and speed up the transition. Many companies are doing this very well. Many of them are planting trees. They are sponsoring projects that are green, and this is great. Okay, so people are already doing this. But finally, these investments must be made public and trackable. Nowadays, if you are fighting emissions or you are fighting climate change and you don't communicate it properly, you are not doing yourself any good, because people might not know that you are doing anything of that benefit to the environment. And they will continue to see the oil and gas industry as a problem, as long as they don't know what you do to reduce your emissions. So if we are going to do this, it has to be in such a way that people can see that we have taken these decisions and we are truly committed to reducing the carbon footprint of the industry. Now, let's develop net zero plans. I have seen net zero plans from many companies from our local oil and gas industry here, and they look very great. Okay, but there are also many companies that I haven't seen any net zero plan. We should have net zero plan that will show the carbon intensity of the field, that will give us a way of monitoring and mitigating the carbon intensity of the field, and being able to track when we will get to net zero. And also we should be able to show the cost and the timelines that we want to attain net zero. This should be something that we hold ourselves accountable to, that every company can come up with that, and also provide a means that we can see and follow. Okay, once people can see this, it goes a long way to tell them that we are an industry that is very much concerned about our environment. Then I am proposing that we build a framework for monitoring and dissemination. I have sent this idea to many people, and they said that, okay, it might not be feasible here, but I want to explain it here. Who knows? Maybe since this is a public lecture, people might find it useful. But this is what I'm saying. If you take a typical company, for example, its carbon footprint is known. Okay, you don't need to go out there to educate a layman about the carbon footprint of an oil and gas company. Actually, they believe that our emission is much more than we report. That is what a typical layman will believe. So they know. But what they don't know is the amount of resources you are committing into mitigation activities. The amount of resources companies commit into their mitigation activities can only be found in their sustainability report. And only technical people read the sustainability report. So they don't know. Okay, once in a while you post a few things on social media, that is great. But when people look at these numbers, there's no way of comparing the mitigation effort with your emission effort so that they'll be able to tell if you are making a significant progress or not. Okay, there should be a way where we extract your emission data, we extract your mitigation data, and be able to put them side by side for people to see how your emission data compare with your mitigation effort. That will actually go to benefit the industry, because the industry is doing a lot in terms of mitigating greenhouse gases. But the only way that the public will get to see how this is done is if we can communicate it in a very simple way that a layman will be able to put those two figures together and have an understanding. So we extract them, we develop a net zero tracking and forecasting system, and then a user-friendly interactive display system where people can just log on into the website, check Ghana's oil and gas industry, and you'll be able to tell that as a company, this is how you are fighting your emissions. And also, this is when you are likely to attain net zero. And also, we should be thinking about taking steps to deploy CCUS in the future. Now, currently, we are at a point that we can conduct very good assessment of our basins. We have 4 large basins in Ghana. That is a blessing. Okay, many countries do not have that. But we need to take concrete steps to assess these basins to find out if there are facilities out there that we can safely store CO2. And then be able to conduct these assessments properly and have a fair idea of what the volume that we can dispose of through CCUS. Now, this can be done. And we have a project that is ongoing in that. But of course, we are at a very early stage. And this is the framework that we are using. We have developed that we are using to conduct the assessment. We have developed a few applications that we can use to give a preliminary idea if a formation will be good or suitable for CO2 storage or not. All right, so this brings me to the end of my lecture, and I have three simple conclusions. Number one, we need an innovative revenue management model that shows that the development of oil and gas projects can be used to drive the energy transition. And I've showed that there's a part of every barrel of oil we sell that do not belong to us. That should go into offsetting our emissions. We need to find a way to give that back to the climate where it belongs. And then there's an aspect, or there's a fraction of that money that belongs to us. Let's commit to using it in carbon neutral projects that will further speed up the transition. We need a new paradigm where every activity in the oil and gas industry reflects the energy transition. And we are already doing that. From licensing to regulation, every step on the way, we put in some measures that will help us to reduce our carbon footprint. And then finally, we need an effective communication and dissemination plan to be able to tell people out there and shift the mindset of society from seeing the oil and gas industry as a purely profit-driven to a sustainability-driven industry. Because for now, they just see us as people who do not care about the environment. We want to pollute the environment and make money. But if we make these commitments, the mindset of people will change over time. They will see us as people who are committed to the environment. At the same time, we are sustaining life by providing energy that is unparalleled and providing materials and resources that the very lives of human beings depends on. Let me introduce you to my lab, the Net Zero Carbon Emission Lab. We are into carbon emission assessment, emission monitoring, emission mitigation. We solve problems related to oil and gas, mining, and other heavy-duty industry. We can be reached by the contacts that are put here, and that brings me to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for following through, and I'll stand by for any comments, suggestions, or questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Yen. Wow, that was a very packed and insightful lecture. Thank you very much. So we will open the floor for questions. Please, we'll take them one at a time. So if you have a question, you can. Okay, I think I see a hand raised. Just a quick one. Let me have a quick look at this. Yes, so please, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and then you can speak, please. Thank you. Okay, you can also type it in the chat box and then I will read them out as you go along. So perhaps I should start with the first question, Doc. So you talked about a very critical aspect of the sustainability of the oil and gas industry in Africa, which has to do with the lack of indigenous investment, right? It seems that as a people, we are risk averse, but we also want maximum returns. And if you look at OPEC and a number of African countries in there, Nigeria, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, etc., it's a bit surprising when you look at the big oil and gas companies, you don't see any African countries. I mean, NNPCL by now should have been like Saudi Aramco, given the resources that is available. So the question is, how do we make African oil and gas companies become more relevant in this industry, right? Because even if we decide that, or even if we successfully argue that we should be allowed to emit a bit more in order to improve our energy access, we simply don't have the funds and the investments to do it. And if the global north is shifting away, it means that we'll eventually end up having to shift because we can't afford not to shift, right? So how do we go around this issue of lack of indigenous investment and within the African context?
Thank you so much. I think one of the solutions that is already in progress is the establishment of the African Energy Bank. I think that bank was established to provide resources for the development of indigenous resources in Africa. So that could be a very great weapon in terms of financing development of fossil-related resources in Africa. But when it comes to building indigenous companies to that extent where they can compete globally, I think the challenge has to do with the level of freedom that these companies have to develop. I've seen that many of the privately owned indigenous companies are doing much, much better in terms of their revenue compared to the government-owned one when it comes to African countries. And the reason is that the private businessman has full control over the decisions that we make in the company. The government-owned companies do not have that level of freedom. So even if they really wanted to take decisions that strong decisions that will benefit the company, they will not be able to do that. And I think that is the major challenge that these companies are facing. I don't think government influence in other companies, global companies such as Saudi Aramco, is as high as that of, for example, NNPC.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. We have some questions that have been typed in here. So Bright Butcher is asking, what is the future of CCUS in Ghana?
Now, that is a very big question. In all the energy transition framework that Ghana has developed, government has shown commitment to CCUS. Okay, so this is something that government is committed to. But what we haven't done is taking concrete steps to deploy it. Okay, if we say, for example, we want to deploy CCUS by 2040, by 2023, we should be doing something practical to show that we want to attain that height by 2040. That is where we are right now. We haven't done that. Okay, whether it is developing maybe research products such as what we are doing here, trying to conduct preliminary assessment, look at data, quantifying storage volume, and basic things such as injectivity, containment capacity. These things should be done around this stage. And then also looking at planning of industry. Okay, the industries where we want to capture CO2 to store in these formations. We need to be able to plan them, locate them in the right places so that we can reduce the cost of capturing and transporting the gases to the storage site for injection. But for now, we haven't done the basic assessment. We need to do that and create the map. And then we will use that to inform the location of industries in the near future. So I think the future is good. I have a strong belief that we will get to that point. But for now, we are not there yet.
All right. It's a work in progress. Thank you very much, Doc. Ebenezer Ofori has raised his hand. Please, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. I wanted to find out, if you look at China, for instance, currently China and India, the economy is booming. And with this effect comes with the increase in the carbon emissions. Okay, so I wanted to find out what exactly is China doing that the world has not put so much pressure on China to phase out fossil fuels as compared to what Africa is facing. And then secondly, when you look at the diversification model, the N-1 principle, I wanted to find out, currently with the IEA report being said that the world still depends, the world energy mix is still around 80%. Is the world really ready for energy transition? And then the last thing that I wanted Doc to also elaborate on is about the utilization of Africa's natural gas for its energy transition. How can we design the business model, the market design, leveraging of technology as well as system operations to make sure that we utilize our natural gas resources, get enough money, and then invest in renewable energy resources. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. You have so many questions. The first question is around China. There are 3 reasons why China is such a force when it comes to global energy. The first one is that China has its own resources. Okay, by resources, I mean investment and technology to develop and utilize these forms of energy. Okay, they have it. Number 2, China has committed large resources into development of renewable energy. Currently, they are the global leader when it comes to development of renewable energy. They are leaders in terms of capacity, and they are also leading in terms of technology. So they are that good currently when they are compared to every other country. And then finally, China is not dependent on any country. For example, for investment and technology, to that extent that that country can dictate to it. So China is autonomous, it's on its own. In fact, many countries rather depend on China for both manufacturing and investment. Okay, so they are at the global table. And as I said in my presentation, if you are at the table where the decisions are made, usually you don't really need to fight that much for a just transition because you are making the decision and China is part of the decision-making body. So that is it for China. You wanted to know if the world is ready for energy transition, since we are still about 80% dependent on fossil fuels. Well, that is not really a yes or no. There's no a yes or no answer to that. Everyone out there wants good health, okay? We want to preserve life. I don't want to put this world into risk because this is the only world that I know. This is the only place that I know, okay? The same applies to everyone out there. Okay? People mean well for the planet. But at the same time, we need to live, okay? As I'm doing this presentation, I need my computer to work. I need the internet to work. And all these things depends on energy. And currently, the energy that is affordable, accessible, and also reliable is fossil fuel. So that is why we still depend on this predominantly. We are not denying that we need to transition, but we also acknowledge that as a people, we need to live and find a way not to put ourselves into risk just because of the transition. So both sides will have to be looked at, and that is why fossil fuel dependence is still around that same figure. Now, if you ask me, I think that by 2030, the dependence won't change that much. It won't change too much from 80%. Now, so what we can do is to rather find a way to offset the carbon footprint of the industry and find a way to reduce the scope 3 emissions. That will help us. But if we want to go on that tangent of trying to phase out fossil fuels, I think the resistance is going to be so much that it will become very difficult because we are already dependent on it also for revenue and employment opportunity. So it's going to be difficult to reduce that. I think the final question was on natural gas. Natural gas is earmarked as a transition fuel of many African countries, including Ghana, which is great because the carbon footprint of natural gas is way, way lower compared to oil. Okay, but we are at a point that once again, the investment and the technology is not ours. So if we truly see natural gas as our future, it means we need to invest more into developing technology and also looking at a way to fund these projects by ourselves within our continent to be able to grow with it and use it in large scale in the near future.
Thank you very much. So there's another question here on the polluter pay principles. Eugene is asking, can taxation for the use of fossil fuel-based vehicles be considered an application of the polluter pays model suggested? And I would like to add something to that question because it was something that I was planning to ask you as well. Is in energy economics, the polluter pays principle is widely accepted, right? But if you look at its application, especially within the African context, it leaves a bit to be desired. Recently, I think in the recent Ghanaian budget, the government proposed 100 cedi levy, right, on all vehicles, on all internal combustion.
I was going to come on. I was going to mention that. Thank you.
And it's a clear violation of the polluter because the big V8 of the government appointee is a bigger polluter than my small Tiku that I used to move around, right? So how do we get that conversation right in terms of, because it really look at the emissions market in general, apart from South Africa, within the African context, only South Africa has a carbon emissions market. And we are starting off, instead of asking the polluters to pay, we are saying everybody should pay because everybody pollutes. How do we get a conversation right?
All right. Thank you very much. I think the reason why the government charges flat taxes mostly is because of lack of data. Okay, government is struggling for data, and we must bear with them on one side to a large extent. If you have data on every vehicle out there and you can actually track, then we could actually categorize these vehicles into maybe 3 or 4 different categories and tax each based on a certain bracket of pollution. Okay, so that is something that we could do. But the point where they are starting is not too bad. Okay, it's a flat rate, which I think is a bit high for some people and a bit too low for some people. But I think that we should move on from there to the point where we are categorizing all the vehicles, because we can't collect enough data to personalize it. So we should categorize it into groups where a certain range of vehicles, depending on their consumption, will pay a certain rate. And then those who fall outside that will also pay a certain rate. So I think that we should move on to that. But for now, where we are starting from, it's also a good place to start. At least we have something going on. As long as we can use the revenue in the right way, that will help us to offset our emissions.
All right. Julian Akrofi has his hand raised. Please mute yourself and ask a question. We'll probably take 2 more and then we will round up. Julian, please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope
Good afternoon.
I'm
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
So during the presentation, I think Dr. Yen mentioned in his presentation that the geopolitics is not favoring the African countries. So just like he also, I think during his presentation, he said that if countries like TOR and GNPC are to be able to receive enough investment, at least we can also depend on certain things that will not really much depend on the external countries. But I also want to add, he also said the government has a good plan for this CCUS, but they are just not implementing it. So I want to ask if there are individuals or institutions that will put the government in check to enable them to implement these policies, or if not, that will just be always coming back just to be having discussions on the same matter over and over again without being implemented. Thank you.
All right. I think the first question, I didn't get that question very well. But the second one, which is CCUS,
Yes.
I don't think that currently we are at the point where we can really put pressure on government to implement it. Actually, it will be to the advantage of government if we take concrete steps to deploy CCUS. This is the reason. If government conduct the assessment by itself, develop the facility, get enough investment to deploy, companies and industries that are coming up, for example, the Ghana Petroleum Hub Corporation Development Corporation, anticipates refineries. Okay, we anticipate industries there that are going to contribute large point source emissions. Now, where are we going to keep these gases that are going to be emitted? Do we have plans for them? Okay, so if government conducts this assessment and have some plans ahead of time, then investors that are coming in future, they are going to pay to emit, and government will make revenue from that. Okay, but we are not at a point where I think we should put pressure on government to deploy CCUS. We are not even at the point where we are ready to deploy. We are just at the beginning where we need to design. We need to have a very good understanding of our resources and design, conduct very good assessment, and then design the facility, and then move on from there to the next step, which is really doing a thorough, or what we call robust assessment.
All right. So I think this will be our last question because of time. I'll combine the last two questions. So there is Naniga Caleb says, from the recent COP28, several pledges were made, including financial support for African countries. If the West is, okay, so I think he's saying that if it is possible, or if the West actually ends up meeting those financial commitments, will that not be a just enough transition? So what I will basically ask, in addition to that, is that if we receive monetary compensation through these pledges, right, would that represent a just transition? Also, if Africa transitions slower, would that necessarily mean the transition is more just?
Yes, both will mean that we have been treated at least a bit fair. Now, for the first one, remember, this is not the first time the Global North has pledged support that they haven't fulfilled. So we are just hoping that this time they will fulfill it. But it is fair for us to ask them to pay for us to transition. It is very fair. That angle is a good argument that we can put across. We are not saying we want to contribute to global warming, but we are asking that because they have polluted more, they should pay more to help us transition. That is a perfect argument to go along. Now, the second part is a bit challenging, but it also works because, for example, there's no pressure on us to transition by 2030 or 2040. We have agreed to transition around 2070. Most African countries are around 2060, 2070, which is fine. So there's no pressure on us. And I think they have agreed to allow us to transition at our pace. But again, the pace that we have stipulated to transition will all depend on the same resources that I just spoke about.
Right.
If we say we want to transition by 2060, it will depend on the resources they give to us because actually we don't have the resources to be able to get there by ourselves. If we agree to transition by 2030, it will still depend on when the resources come in. So let's wait and see how they will honor these commitments that they made recently.
All right, thank you. All right, so yes, I think and Ebenezer has a question, but I think it is outside the scope of this presentation about the current policy in the recent energy transition framework for controlling methane in the upstream and midstream oil and gas. So Ebenezer, so I believe this question is outside the scope of this presentation. However, I can tell you that the transition framework in its current form doesn't specifically provide a policy on methane as a greenhouse gas. And so if you have a look at either the abridged or the full version of the report, it's quite clear. Everything in there is quite straightforward. I'm sure you probably find more of the answers that you're looking for. Or probably in one of our subsequent presentations, we'll look at the issue of methane and its management or emissions in general in terms of how we manage it within a transition. So all too soon, I mean, this has been a very insightful, packed, and very, very, very interesting conversation. I'm sure if we leave, it will continue until tomorrow, but we have to end somewhere. And I think this is a good place to end. So, so all too soon.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation and then the questions. It's been a very engaging time. We are almost 50 minutes over time, so we'll have to end it here. We've learned a lot, including your suggestions for ensuring that we manage the revenue in a way that allows us to show that the industry is not just profit-driven, but also sustainability-driven. And I believe that there are quite a number of suggestions in there that hopefully can make it to the desk of the policymakers for consideration. So thank you so much. I would like to remind all our listeners to follow all SP Ghana social media channels. We're on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, wherever there is social media. SP Ghana is a LinkedIn, etc. Please engage with us on there. If you have additional questions, if you have, even if you have technical lectures in areas that you would like to hear about, you can suggest it to us, and we'll find the relevant experts to deliver on us. Also, it's almost the end of the year. I would like to remind everyone to please renew your SP membership. It's important for keeping the section going, and we really appreciate all your support and involvement and engagement over the course of 2023. There are a lot more exciting programs coming up over the festive period. And so please stay connected and please follow us, and we'll continue to engage with you for the benefit of the industry and everyone who is in it. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Yen. We hope to have you again to have follow-up discussions around this, and then also to engage with your Net Zero Carbon Emissions Lab for more insightful presentations. Thank you so much, everyone, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.